Yeah. All right. So today we are going to see one of the most important concept, common Selenium WebDriver exceptions. So we will get common exceptions most of the time, WebDriver exceptions when you're writing our automation test scripts or when you're running your automation test scripts, we will commonly get some kind of exceptions. So what is the main objective of exception? So why we will get an exception? Why we'll get an exception normally? Because of some input is not valid, then we'll get some exception. So what is the purpose of concept of exception handling? What is the main concept of exception handling? Suppose if there is any exception, so we should not make our code or script terminate immediately. So instead of that, we need to provide a proper message. Then we will exit from the code. So we should not immediately terminate the code. With the proper message, we need to exit from the code whenever you get some exception. So that is the main objective of using exception handling, right? Even Selenium also, there are different type of exceptions are there. So we will discuss one by one. Around 15 to 20 exceptions are there, which are very commonly we will see while executing our tests or framework. And first we'll see what is that exception name and when you will get that type of exception and how we can handle that exception. The first one, no such element exception. So very, very common exceptions. Many times we have seen this exception, no such element exception. So what is no such element exception? When you will get it occurs when an element with the specified locator cannot be found in the DOM. So for example, let's say I provided one locator, let's say by.id, some ID or some name or some XPath I provided. But with this particular attribute or with this XPath or with this CSS, there is no element available in the web page. In that case, we will get a no such element exception. So trying to interact with the element that doesn't exist on the web page itself. So whatever the locator you passed here, corresponding element itself is not available in the web page. So in that particular case, you will see no such element exception. Okay, so suppose when you write statement like this, suppose here the ID is not available or XPath or CSS is not available. The XPath ID name you have used is correctly written, but the corresponding element is not available. The element itself is not available. So in that case, we will get a no such element exception. So how we can handle this? So normally you can put in the try catch block. So you can put that element in the try catch block. And in the catch block, you can say no such element exception and simply provide a message to the user like element not found along with the proper message. Okay, and sometimes maybe the element takes some time to load on the web page. So you can also wait for the element for some time. Let's say you can use WebDriver wait like this and wait until expected conditions dot presence of element located and then pass the locator. And it will wait for the element, and once it is present on the web page, then it will return the web element and then it will continue the process. But even after 10 seconds, if the element is not available, then again you'll get the timeout exception then, because we use WebDriver wait also, right? Even WebDriver wait is also exceeded the time, so then you will get the timeout exception. Okay, sometimes we can handle through WebDriver wait. Even WebDriver wait is also not able to solve, means there is some problem with the element, so that element is not available. So this is how we can handle it. We can put in the try catch block, the element locator, along with this we can put try block, and catch block we can just simply provide the message to the user. So that is no such element exception. So when you will get this, if the locator is correct but corresponding element is not available or not present on the web page, then you will get no such element exception. You need to remember, guys, because in interview, definitely they will ask some kind of exceptions. At least 4 to 5 exceptions you need to remember. Very, very important. And whatever exceptions I have noted in this document, all are important. 15 to 20 types of exceptions. Very frequently we'll get these exceptions. You should remember them. Now, the next exception is element not visible exception. This is another type of exception. Element not visible exception. So when this will occur, it occurs when element is present in the DOM, but it is not visible on the web page. Okay, you understood my point? Element is present in the DOM, but it is not visible. And what kind of element it is? It is there in the DOM, but it is not visible on the page. This is basically a hidden element. right? Header element. So occurs when element is present in the DOM, but it's not visible on the web page, then you will get a element not visible exception. So normally we will capture the element and then we will try to perform the action, click action. Then you will get this exception. Identifying the element is working fine, but when you perform the action, it is not visible. So you will get element not visible exception. Right? So how we can handle this normally? So whenever you get an element, first verify the status. Okay. If it is displayed, then click on the element. Okay, if it is not displayed, obviously it will throw exception. So we need to handle that in the catch block, element not visible exception, and provide the proper message to the user. Element is not visible. Sometimes, even though it is not visible on the web page, we can make it visible forcefully and then we can perform the action. Using JavaScript executor, it is possible. So how we can make it visible? JavaScript executor execute script arguments of 0 style.display.block element, whatever element we are looking for, can pass the element, and this particular statement will make our element visible on the page. After it is visible, then we can perform the click action. So most of the times this solution will solve it, especially when you have hidden elements. So the elements are present in the DOM, but they are not visible on the web page. So we can make those elements visible using JavaScript executor, and then we can perform the click action. So this will solve the problem. And we can also handle this using try catch block. Suppose if you're not using JavaScript executor, so definitely that will throw exception. So you can handle the exception using try catch block. But if you're using JavaScript executor, it will be able to handle it. Then you don't need to use try catch block. So this is element not visible exception. Now, third one, stale element reference exception. Stale element reference exceptions. Very, very important and very popular exception. Stale element reference exception. So when you will get this, the exception is thrown when an element is no longer attached to the DOM, usually after a page update or a refresh. Very, very important exception, guys. Suppose you captured some element and you have performed some action, immediately it is working fine. But after writing some piece of code, suppose you have written some piece of code for loading page or refreshing the page. After that, again, if you are trying to perform, or after that, if you are trying to locate this element, then you will get a stale element reference exception. So stale is nothing but what? Whenever you refresh the page or whenever you update your page, the element becomes stale. So the locator may not work. So you need to again locate the element one more time. So how we can handle this? We need to just relocate the element. One more time, we need to write a locator. For example, let's say here I have located my element, and when you're performing the action, it is throwing stale element reference exception. So immediately in the catch block, what you need to do? Again, relocate the same element, write the whole thing again one more time, and then perform the action. So this will solve the problem. Stale element reference exception can be solved by relocating the element once again. Because whenever you refresh the page or whenever you update the page or reload the page, the same locator may not work one more time. So you need to again keep on rewrite the same locator one more time. That is stale element reference exception. Stale element reference exception. So let me give you an example. So when it will happen, normally, most of the times you will see this exception. Let's say this is my automation script. Let's say in the first place here, I have located my element. This is my element. Okay, and my element is here. Now I have done some activity here, and here I refreshed my page. And again, this element I'm trying to use it here. So then what happens? You will get a stale element reference exception. Because you have done some update or you have done some refresh after locating this element. So here what you need to, again, you need to write a locator here. One more time, you need to locate the element and then you will get you can continue the action. So that you can do using try catch block. So this is stale element reference exceptions. Whenever you refresh the page or whenever you update the page, the element becomes stale. So in that case, you will get a stale element exception. What is the solution for this? You just relocate the element in the catch block. Next one, invalid element state exception. Invalid element state exception. So when it will throw, when attempting to interact with the element, that cannot be interacted with, such as disabled form field, entering text into disabled text field. Very important. Most of the times it will happen. Suppose invalid element state exception. Invalid element state exception. Let's say you have some input box and currently it is a disabled state. You can't enter any value, but still you are entering the value by using send keys method. So because it is a disable, it is not allowed to provide any value into it. So in that case, you will get invalid element state exception. Currently, the state of element is not ready to accept the data or accept the value. So in that case, we'll get an invalid element state exception. If it is enabled, then only we can pass or we can interact with the element. Not only input box, in case of buttons also, sometimes it will happen. Suppose button is a disabled, but you are trying to click on that button. In that case also, you will get invalid element state exception. So first of all, before performing any action on the element, that element should allow us to perform the action. It can be click or it can be send keys, whatever. So otherwise, it will throw invalid element state exception. So for example, here I have taken some input field and I'm passing the send keys method. If it is a disabled, then the send keys method will throw invalid stale element exception. So again, how we can handle this? Simple. We can put the try catch block. So we can just put the input field in the try block and pass this value. If it is thrown exception, catch block, you can handle this invalid element state exception and just provide the message to the user like cannot interact with the element because it is disabled, something like that. You can provide some user defined message to the user. Okay, so this is invalid element state exception. If the element is a disabled, if you are trying to perform some action on that element, then you will get an invalid element state exception. This is one more important thing. Now, next one, element click intercepted exception. This is also very common exception. Most of the times we have seen this. Element click intercepted exception. Element click intercepted exceptions occur when another element abstract the click action. Another element abstract the click action. Element click, this exception is specifically for clicking. When you're clicking on checkbox or when you're clicking on the radio button or when you're clicking on the button or link, you will get element click intercepted exception. So when you will get these exceptions, suppose you have some web page and you are trying to click on this link or button and you have written code properly and it is trying to click on this. But when you're launching the page, sometimes the page is not maximized. Sometimes the page is a small size page is open. Okay, and sometimes elements is overlapped. In that case, what happens? The another element will abstract the click action. So it is not allowing to click on that particular element. Maybe because of overlapping, because of the size of the page, it is not allowing us to click on that element. So in that case, you will get element click intercepted exception. It is basically interrupted the click action. So element click intercepted exception you will get whenever the another element abstract the click action. So for example, I have located a button element. I'm just performing the click. So if any other element is overlapped or any other element is disturbing the process or thing, then you will get this exception. It's not allowing to perform the click action. Then how we can handle this? You can put in the try catch block. So try button, in the try, you can capture the button, perform the click. If it is not able to click, element clicker interception will be written and then you can provide proper message to the user. But how we can handle this? Suppose this is not problem of user actually. So we can still handle. How we can handle? Using explicit wait or JavaScript executor you can use. So most of the times we can solve this element click intercepted exception either by using explicit wait or by writing JavaScript executor. There are two methods are there to solve this problem. First method, using explicit wait. So you can just create a WebDriver wait, explicit wait, and wait until element to be clickable. This is the conditional method we have to use. So once the element is able to click, if the condition matches, then we can perform the click action. So mostly this will solve the problem, element click intercepted exception. Okay, so in case even explicit wait is also not able to solve, then you can use JavaScript executor approach. So JavaScript executor definitely will solve the problem because we are internally directly executing the JavaScript instead of running the WebDriver command. So js.execute script arguments of 0 means what? Whatever element we are passing here, that is stored in arguments of 0, then we are performing the click action through JavaScript executor. So element click intercepted exception we can solve either by using explicit wait or by using JavaScript executor. Okay, and if you still want to handle this, then you can again put in the try catch block. Okay, so in the catch block directly you can put the solution. Okay, so if it is throw exception, then alternative you can try with explicit wait, alternative you can put JavaScript executor, so that you can put in the catch block. That will automatically solve the problem. So element click intercepted exception, when you will get this exception, if any other element interrupt the process or interrupt the click action or interrupt the any other action, you will get a element click intercepted exception. Most common exception. Next, element not interactable exception. Sometimes you will get this element not interactable. When this will occur, when the element present in the DOM, the element is present in the DOM, but it is not in the state to be interacted. It can be hidden or it can be disabled. There are multiple options are there. There are multiple reasons are there. So element is there. It is there in the DOM, but we are not able to interact this. Suppose if it is input box, we are not able to pass the value. If it is a button, we are not able to click on the button. So we are not able to interact with the element. Maybe it is a hidden element or it may be disabled state. We don't know. So in multiple cases, you will get an element not interactable exception. So what is the solution? Again, we can put in the try catch block, click on the element and element not interactable exception and provide the message. How we can solve this? There are 3 different ways we can solve this problem. Element not interactable. First thing, using explicit wait we can solve, because we are waiting here till the element is clickable or till element to be clickable, and then get the element, perform the click. This is one solution. If it didn't work, then you can go with the make the element visible first. And the same solution we have used for disable this hidden elements also. Same solution may work here. So first make the element is visible on the DOM and then perform the click action. This is one solution using JavaScript executor. If it is a hidden, you can apply this solution. Suppose if it is a disabled state, okay, and then you can use JavaScript executor. So this is another solution. Okay, so these are the different 3 solutions which we have to solve element not interactable exception. Next, no such attribute exception. No such attribute exception. Sometimes we are trying to get some value of the attribute of the element. For example, let's say just now we have seen. So I just capture one element. From that element, I'm trying to get some attribute. It can be name or ID, placeholder, whatever. And based on the value, I want to do some task. Sometimes if the attribute is not available for the element, but still you are trying to get the value of the attribute, then you will get a no such attribute exception. So thrown when trying to retrieve an attribute from the element, but the attribute does not exist. Okay, suppose I want to capture the value of the name attribute. I have written get attribute of name, but name is not available for the attribute. Then you will get a no such attribute exception. Again, that you can put inside the try block. And if that will throw exception, then by using catch block, you can put no such attribute exception and provide the proper message to the user. This is no such attribute exception. Using try catch block, we can handle. Next one, no such window exception. No such window. And this exception we will get mostly, we will work with the multiple windows or multiple tabs. We have a switching command, right? Switch to dot new window, switch to dot window. So while working with those methods, we will get no such window exception. So thrown when trying to switch to window that does not exist. So if you got window ID or handle value, and by using the handle, you are trying to switch to the particular window, but by the time that window is got closed by some reason. So then you will get a no such window exception. So you're trying to switch to some window. Suppose you have opened 2 windows, one is parent and child window, and you have successfully switched to the child window, and by mistake you closed your parent window. Now again you are trying to switch back to the parent window. In that scenario, you will get a no such window exception. If the window is not available, but still you are trying to switch to it. In that case, you will get a no such window exception. So in that case, put that in the try block, switch to window, and in the catch block, write a small message to the user, window is not found. So the program will not be terminated unexpectedly. So it will properly terminate the program, properly exit from the program. This is no such window exception and belongs to Windows. Similarly, there is same kind of exception is there for frame. No such frame exception. No such frame. Again, same reason. Suppose I'm trying to switch to particular frame, but the frame does not exist. So then you will get a no such frame exception. I'm trying to switch to the frame, but the frame itself does not exist on the page. Then you will get a no such frame exception. And again, you can put that command in the try block, and in the catch block, you can write no such frame exception and provide message to the user. No such frame exception. And same thing we have for alert also. No alert present exception. No alert present exception. So when you will get this occur when trying to interact with the alert that does not exist. Suppose I just want to capture the alert, then I want to close it, for example. So you're trying to switch to it. Once you get an alert, then you can accept it. But suppose this is not able to get the alert. Why? Because the alert itself is not available. That doesn't exist. If it exists, then you are able to switch to alert, then you can accept it. But the alert itself is not exist. Then how come this switch.alert will get the alert to you? It cannot get. So in that case, you will get a no alert present exception. And again, same thing, we can put that command in the try block. And if it is throw exception, then catch block, you can handle this. No alert present exception. You can provide proper exception name and then provide message to the user. So this is no alert present except. Three exceptions are almost similar. No such window exception, no such frame exception, no alert present exception. So these three exceptions will related to window, frame, alert. Okay, if they are not exist, still we are trying to switch to them, then you'll get these exceptions. Next one, unhandled alert exception. Unhandled alert exception. It is also related to alert. So when you will get this, it thrown when there is unhandled alert preventing WebDriver from interacting with the page. That means what? Attempting to click on element while an alert is open. See, whenever you get an alert, will you able to do any other activity? Till you close that alert window, you cannot proceed further, right? So suppose the alert is available, but still you are trying to do some other action without closing the alert. In that case, you will get an exception. Okay. So how to handle this? You can put the switching command and accept command in the try block. And then if it is thrown unhandled alert exception, then you can provide proper message to the user. So thrown when there is unhandled alert preventing WebDriver from interacting with the web page, attempting to click on element while alert is open, then you will get an unhandled alert exception. Next one, this is mouse related action. Move target out of bounds exception. So most of the times you will get this exception when you do mouse actions. Move target out of bounds exception. So when this exception occurs, suppose you are trying to move your mouse outside of the visible screen area. So suppose you are in the web page, you want to do some mouse over action, you provide proper element. Suppose if the element is out of the scope, or suppose if there is a slider, right? In the slider, you want to move the slider from one place to X to Z or Z to X, some horizontal or vertical. And if you are providing the pixel number more than the size, then you are going out of the bound. So you will get this exception. Move target out of the bound. Suppose the slider size is, let's say, 0 to 100, and you are trying to move to 125, for example, or 150, you are going out of bound exception. You are going to out of bound the range. So then you will get this exception. Move target out of bound exception occurs when trying to move the mouse outside of the visible screen area. And this will throw exception. Whenever you move to element of perform, you will get an exception. So better to keep this in the try block, everything. And if you got move target out of bound exception, then you can provide proper message to the user to the catch block. This is move target out of bound exception. Next, screenshot exception. So you'll get this exception when you're working with the capturing the screenshots. Suppose you are trying to capture the screenshot from the page, but at the time it is got minimized, for example, then it will fail to capture the screenshot, because whenever you want to capture the screenshot, the page should be visible properly. Okay, so sometimes it may be visible or sometimes it is minimized, it is not visible. In that case, if it is not properly capture the screenshot, then you will get this exception, screenshot exception. So that is the reason whenever you're trying to capture the screenshot and doing copy and everything, you put that in the try block, and in the catch block, handle the screenshot exception. If it is able to capture the screenshot, that's still fine. If it is not able to capture, then you will able to handle the exception by providing try catch block. This is related to screenshot exception. Now, invalid selector exception. This is also very commonly we get this exception, invalid selector exception. It's very simple. Suppose you have written some find element by dot xpath or css or id, whatever, and you have especially related to xpath and css. Invalid selector exception is especially related to xpath and css. And suppose you have created some incorrect xpath or incorrect css, then you will get invalid selector exception. Incorrect in the sense what? Syntactically incorrect. Suppose instead of using two slashes, you have used only one single slash forward slash, and instead of keeping single quote, you suppose you forgot to put double quotations in the bracket. So if xpath or css syntax is correct, syntax is incorrect, then you will get invalid selector exception. So most of the times we will check xpath and css in selector hub, whether they are properly trying to locate element or not, and then we will use them in our automation script. Most of the time we don't directly use in our automation script. So there are very less number of chances are there to get this exception. But sometimes by copy pasting, if you miss something, if you miss some syntax, then you will get invalid selector exception, especially for xpath and css. Okay. Now, safe side, what we can do is we can put that locator in the try block, and if it is thrown invalid selector exception, then you can handle with the catch block, just providing message to the user. That is invalid selector exception. If xpath is syntactically incorrect or css is also syntactically incorrect, then you will get invalid selector exception. Now, next one, invalid session ID exception. Invalid session ID exception. So what is session ID means? What is the session ID? So whenever you are trying to launch or whenever trying to create a driver instance, like whenever you say driver equal to WebDriver driver equal to new Chrome driver, you're creating the object for Chrome driver, right? So that time the session will be created. One session will be created. Chrome browser session or Edge browser session or Firefox browser session will be created. So when you will get invalid session ID exception, suppose when you're trying to use WebDriver after session has been terminated. You are trying to use WebDriver after session has been terminated. For example, let's say WebDriver driver equal to new Chrome driver you created. So that will actually create the session. And immediately you quit it or you close it. After that, you are trying to do some activity. So before doing activity itself, you already quitting from the browser, already quitting from the closing the browser. So obviously when I use close or quit command, what will happen? Session will be closed. So the session ID no longer available. So in that case, you will get an invalid session exception. If the session is not available, that is already session ID is closed by quit or close command, but still you are trying to interact with the page or element, then you will get invalid session exception. So once you created your driver instance, you should not close it till you complete your activities or till you completed all the actions on the page. Okay, so by mistake, if you close the page and then you are trying to do some activity means you will get an invalid session exception. So that is the reason you can just try to put driver.get inside the try block. Whenever you're launching the page, put that in the try block, and in the catch block, you can say invalid session exception. And then you can provide message to the user. This is invalid session ID exception. Next one, timeout exception. And this is especially related to explicit wait. Timeout exception, explicit wait. So normally implicit wait also we specify the time, right? But implicit wait is applicable for all the elements. So if suppose I'm looking for some element, and let's say in implicit wait I put 10 seconds maximum, and the element is not available within 10 seconds. So obviously you will get an exception related to element, no such element exception, something like this. But you won't get timeout exception there. But in case of explicit wait, also we will specify the time, right, in explicit wait. But how we will use this explicit wait? By putting proper condition. Let's say I written like this: expected conditions dot visibility of element located, some element I provided. Also I put some conditional method. Suppose within this particular time, this condition should be satisfied. If this condition is not satisfied within 10 seconds, then timeout exception will come. It is based on the condition and time. But in implicit wait, we don't put any condition. So obviously that will throw exception. Implicit wait will not throw timeout exception, but only explicit wait will throw timeout exception. So if the condition is not satisfied within this time, then you will get a timeout exception, which is related to explicit wait. So safe side, what we can do, these wait statements also we can put in the try catch block. In case if there is a timeout exception, we can handle properly using catch block, and we can exit the program properly without terminating it. So element not found within the time limit, you can just provide proper message to the user, and then you can exit from the program. So this is timeout exception. So timeout exception is basically related to what? Explicit wait or fluent wait, not related to implicit wait. Okay. Next one, insecure certification exception. This is related to SSL certification. What is SSL means? SSL, secure socket layer. So through when Selenium is unable to verify SSL certificate of the secure socket layer. So unable to verify the SSL certificate of the website with an insecure connection. So normally if I open any website which is not having SSL certificate or invalid certificate, so then what happens? By default, you will get an exception. Insecure certificate exception you will get. But to avoid that exception, what we can do? We configure that in the Chrome options, right? In the Chrome options, we can pass these parameters. We can create a Chrome options class, and in the option, there is a method called set accept insecure certificates, make it as a true. In that case, the exception we can avoid, insecure certificate exception we can avoid. But if you're not handling this, for example, it's not handling this, there is no SSL certificate valid, then definitely you will get an exception. But if you still want to continue with that website with by ignoring SSL certificate, then you can say options dot set accept insecure certification, make it is true, and pass that options object in the driver. So that will solve the problem. Okay. So this is insecure certificate exception related to SSL. Next one. Invalid argument exception. Invalid argument exceptions. Okay, so in implicit wait or explicit wait, can we pass negative time? Time in negative value? No. Time cannot be a negative value, right? So when you pass a negative value, that is obviously invalid argument. So duration of half second should accept only integers. But here I'm passing -10. Even it can be implicit wait or it can be explicit wait, whatever. Basically, it is invalid argument. It is not accepting. So that case, that will throw invalid argument exception. So whenever you're using implicit wait also or explicit wait, keep them also in try catch block. In case any issue comes, that will throw exception. Invalid argument exception you will get, and you can provide message to the user. So we cannot give the invalid values here. We don't give it because we know, but sometimes if there is any mistake, by mistake, if unknowingly, if you provide any negative value, then you will get an invalid argument exception. Next one, WebDriver exceptions. Most of the times you will get this. Whenever you start running your script, immediately you will get this. First of all, it will not launch browser itself. Immediately you will get WebDriver exception. So when you will get this WebDriver exception, most of the times, exception thrown when something goes wrong while interacting with the driver. while interacting with the driver, or when you're creating the driver instance, if something goes wrong, then you will get a WebDriver exception. So what could be the reasons? Maybe the browser versions are not compatible. Okay, suppose you are using the old Chrome version or you are using latest Chrome version, then there is no compatibility. Right. And similarly, if you're using latest version of Selenium, but browser is very old, then again, no compatibility. Browser is latest, but we are using very old version of Selenium. So then also there is no compatibility. So in that case, if there is any conflict between your driver and your browser, you will get a WebDriver exceptions. So at the time of creating the WebDriver driver equal to new Chrome driver, so that will not execute first of all. The driver creation itself will fail. In that case, you will get a WebDriver exception. So better to keep those statements in the try-catch block itself. If there is any problem, you can safely exit from the program without interruption. So WebDriver exception you can put in the catch block, and you can provide general WebDriver exception is occurred. And again, you need to check all the versions and properly aligned or not, then you can fix that. So this is WebDriver exception. If WebDriver exception comes, your script will not continue first of all. Even the browser itself will not launch if you have a WebDriver exception, because at the time of creating the driver itself, you have some issue with that. This is WebDriver exception. Next one, session not found exception. Session not found exception. And this is also again, same kind of a scenario. Previously we have seen invalid session exception, same thing related to this. Suppose you have quit from the browser, but still you are trying to do some activity. See here, I have quit from the browser already, but still I'm trying to use the same driver instance. Will it work? No, session has already ended by quit command. So this will not work. So this will throw session not found exception. Session not found exception. So make sure to check if the session is still active before performing the operations or handle the exceptions. So whenever you do some activities, you have to check the session is still alive, then only you can do that. Okay, so keep the whole code inside the try catch block. If it is got failed, session is not available or session not exception thrown, then catch block you can specify that exception and provide a message to the user. Session is already closed or session is not found, something like that. So this is another exception. Session not found exception. These are small exceptions, but by mistake, unknowingly, we will do certain things. So because of that, we will get these kind of exception. But most of the times, nobody will do, right? After quitting the browser, will you do any activity? No, right? Most of the times, we don't do that. But unknowingly, sometimes it will happen. So in that case, you will get a session not found exception. So better to keep inside the try block also. Then you can put proper message in the catch block. So session not found exception. So when you will get this exception, so when you do some activity after quitting the browser means session is already closed, then you will get a session not found exception. Next one, I think this is the last exception. Now there is a small clue here, guys. Suppose you don't know the exception name, but you still want to use try catch, or still you want to handle the exception properly. Then what you can do, you can put the entire code in the try catch block directly. And you can specify different type of elements or different type of exception in one group. Let's say no such element, or stale element reference exception, or element not interactable exception. So like this, you can put different type of exceptions, and then you can put proper message to the user. So this is also the general way to handle the exception. So better to keep all the statements in proper try blocks and handle them by providing proper exception names through catch block. But some exceptions we can solve by using JavaScript executor or WebDriver wait, but certain exceptions we cannot solve because that is problem with the application, not from the side, not from our side. Okay, for example, let's say there is a button which is disabled state. By default, it is a disabled. And if you're trying to perform some action, how it is possible? So the developer should enable that button, then our script will work. So in that case, we cannot solve. We simply exit the code without termination. But suppose an element is there in the page, but somehow it is hidden. In that case, we can make it available, make it visible, then we can perform the action. Forcefully, we can do using JavaScript executor. That will solve the problem. So certain things will solve the problem, certain things may not solve the problem. Similarly, element click intercepted exception. So when you will get element click intercepted exception, the element is there, but you are not able to click on that element. Especially this will happen for checkboxes, radio buttons, links, buttons. So element click intercepted exception, when you will get, sometimes the elements are overlapping and sometimes the page is minimizing or maximizing, that resolution changes because of click may not work on the element properly. So then you can do that forcefully using JavaScript executor. And if you're doing some activity using JavaScript executor, what does that mean? You are trying to do the same activity forcefully through JavaScript executor. We are trying to inject the JavaScript executor statement directly inside the browser. So not through WebDriver. So through WebDriver, we are trying to execute the JavaScript statements directly on the browser. But normally what happens, we are running the WebDriver methods or commands, and through WebDriver method, APIs will be interacted with the browser through JavaScript. So instead of interacting the browser through WebDriver API, we are directly interacting with the browser elements through JavaScript executor. So that's how we can solve certain problems. But every problem is not solved. Okay, for example, let's say I have written proper locator, but the element itself is not visible on the page. Element not visible exception you will get. Element, no such element exception you will get. Can we solve that problem? No, until unless the developer places the element on the page, we cannot do that. So simply we can put that element in the try catch block, and proper message you can just write and exit from the code. Without termination unexpectedly, you can just exit from the code because the element itself is not there in the page. How we can perform the action? So certain things we can solve through JavaScript executor or WebDriver waits, but certain things we cannot solve. Similarly, stale element exception, stale element reference exception. So whenever you refresh the page or reload the page, you will get stale element exception. So developer no need to do anything with that. We need to handle this because we are refreshing the page multiple times. There is a requirement to refresh the page. So you need to handle that using JavaScript executor or by using explicit wait statement. Okay, so these are all common exceptions. Most of the times we will get 20 types of exceptions I have listed out. There are n number of exceptions, but it's difficult to remember each and every at least 5 to 6 exceptions. If you remember easily, you will able to address them in the interview point of view. Okay, so that's all for exception, WebDriver exceptions concept. Okay, yeah. So that's all for today's session. We'll stop here.